What's up, Team 116? Let's continue our journey through the Bible, where we saw Jesus officially start his ministry here on earth, proving a major part of God's relationship to us was being that he meets us where we are at. And this week, Jesus' ministry continues and grows, raising interest, suspicion, confusion, and proving to be a real test of the faithful. So check out this short clip, then follow the instructions on the screen, and I'll see you shortly.
Almost everywhere Jesus went, huge crowds came to see and hear him. One time, he began teaching by a lake. The crowd became so big that he actually had to speak from a boat out in the water. Jesus often told stories, called parables, about everyday life that were symbolic of who God was and what it meant to live in God's ways. Jesus also performed many miracles everywhere he went. He healed sick people and even raised some from the dead. He could also control the weather. One time, when Jesus and his followers were in a boat on a lake, a huge storm came in and the boat began to fill with water. Despite the storm blowing the boat around, Jesus was asleep. Panicked, his followers woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus stood up and commanded the wind and the waves, "Quiet, be still." And the storm was gone. Many people were amazed at the miracles Jesus performed, but the religious leaders, called Pharisees, started to question where Jesus got his power from. At one point, they even accused him of getting power from the devil. King Herod was also fearful of Jesus. A short time earlier, Herod had thrown John the Baptist in jail. He wanted to kill John, but knew that he was a holy man and feared what might happen if he did. Then one day, Herod's daughter was dancing and entertaining Herod's guests at a banquet. Herod was pleased with her and told her she could have anything she requested. Herod's wife stepped in, telling their daughter that she should request the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Herod was fearful, but what could he do? He had promised to give his daughter what she requested. And so he had John beheaded, and the executioners brought his head into the banquet. As Jesus' fame grew, King Herod began to worry that Jesus would bring John back from the dead. Even Jesus' followers began to have second thoughts about him. But his 12 closest followers stuck by Jesus for what was sure to be tough times ahead.
Well, my See the Story this week, I found this quote that I thought was really interesting. Overcome the notion that you must be regular. It robs you of the chance to be extraordinary. And I think that could be a good thing to remember as we go into this week. So the title for this week is How Jesus is No Ordinary Man. But what does that mean? What made crowds of people realize Jesus wasn't just an ordinary man, or even an ordinary healer or teacher? Well, I think there's a few key thoughts from the scriptures for this week to show just how unordinary and extraordinary Jesus was, and why crowds noticed. One is that Jesus taught God's true law, not what had become their conventional understanding of God's law. For example, he revealed that having a murderous thought about someone is as bad as actual murder, that having lustful thoughts about someone is as bad as committing adultery, and many other examples dealing with divorce, making oaths and vows, having humility and helping others, judging others. Multiple times, Jesus took their conventional understanding of God's law, he flipped it on its head, spun it around, counted to 100 in fractions, and did it all while holding one arm and one leg behind his back, reciting the alphabet in German.
Most impressive.
Now, if you found someone who could do all that, do it confidently, and do it in a way where you felt they were intending to help you, would you latch on to them? Many today do, and many back then did. But all the religious leaders, the Pharisees, thought he was crazy because he was throwing the rules that they held over the people out the window. So not only did they not understand him and his teachings, they didn't like it. In his most famous sermon given on a mountain to crowds of people, Jesus even told the people that he was intending to help them. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. He's telling them right here that these leaders holding them to what they believe the law is, that they're wrong, and that you have to surpass them in understanding and acceptance and following of the true nature of God's law, or you will not come to know the true nature of God. Just think for a moment of how often we hear people trying to hold others accountable to their version of God's law, of the Bible. We hear it around school, out in public, on social media, yes, even sometimes in church buildings and among Christians. This is everyday life now, but it was everyday life then too, and Jesus came to reveal the whole truth to them, at least to those who wanted to hear it. A second way Jesus was not an ordinary man was that he healed everyone who had faith that he would heal them. Now, as I mentioned last week, it was common in this time, as it is now, for people who claimed to be healers to basically scam people, to demand things from them, let alone what the priests and leaders were demanding. Well, Jesus wasn't followed by a crowd of people during his ministry. He was followed by crowds of people. Why? Well, if there were so many healers around, why didn't the people just go see them where there were far less crowds? Well, they followed Jesus because he actually healed them, and because he demanded nothing from them other than their faith that he had the power to heal them. As a couple examples, he pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you," and their sight was restored. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. When people needed help, Jesus helped. No conditions, no scams. Jesus helped out of his concern for them. Period.
You've done it again.
Yeah, you're the best.
No, I'm just here to help.
How many people could we lead to Jesus if we just helped those who need help? Period. And a final way in which Jesus proved to be no ordinary man was that he did not teach like any ordinary man. He taught using parables, using earthly ideas and concepts to get across a godly meaning. He used parables to help people understand the true nature of helping others, of sacrifice, of sharing God's message with others, and so many other concepts. And there's one particular parable I want to bring up here, which is one not often brought up, but it shows a certain truth that we can all be better at applying. The Bible calls it the parable of the growing seed. Today, you might hear it come across more as a slogan or a challenge, where someone will say, "You may be the only Bible some people read." He also said, "This is what the kingdom of God is like. A man scatters seed on the ground. Night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself the soil produces grain. First the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it because the harvest has come." How much pressure do we put on ourselves? How hard do we try to have the perfect way to share God with people, to feel like it's all up to us whether someone becomes saved or not? This parable shows the real kicker. It's not up to us at all whether they become saved. All the man in the parable does is scatter the seed. All the rest of the growth happens in the interaction between the seed and the ground. It's not our job or even our role to save anyone, because we can't. It's not up to us. What is up to us is to scatter the seed, to make God known to people in how we live, how we speak, how we act, how we treat others. Put that seed of thought, that seed of interest, that seed of inquisitiveness, that seed of belief in their mind and their heart, and let God do the growing. Jesus was no ordinary man. He had many crowds of people that followed him because they could see that about him. They believed there was something different, something special about him. Jesus' ministry also reflected a lot one of the best movie quotes, in my mind, of all time.
I see it, but I don't believe it.
You're missing the point.
What is the point?
Seeing isn't believing. Believing is seeing.
How does this quote help reflect Jesus' ministry? Well, if you think back and look back at the Israelites throughout all of the Old Testament, We've talked several times already about a pattern that emerges, right? How they follow God for a time, they stay faithful, then they fall back into themselves again. But why did they continue in this cycle? Why could they not stay faithful? Well, when it comes down to it, it's because of the thought from that quote. When God was doing miraculous wonders, providing them food from nothing, parting seas, destroying massive fortresses and armies, the people believed because they could see. When they stopped seeing, they stopped believing. And that's when things failed. Seeing God work does help us to believe, but true seeing comes from our belief, our faith. While many followed him in their belief, he also had many who refused him, who denied him, who plotted against him, and even many who deserted him. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. He could not do any miracles there except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. He was amazed at their lack of faith. Among all the greatness that is shown of Jesus' ministry, there is also this example from his time visiting Nazareth. The people he grew up with, that knew his family, they demonstrated so little faith in him that he was amazed by it. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Most people know about the 12 apostles, but don't know that Jesus actually started with around 70 disciples who followed him. As he continued teaching harder and harder truths, many of those 70 fell away from him, leaving the 12 that we know. Many people, even today, want to imagine Jesus as this feel-good, non-interfering friend kind of guy. But he showed while he was here on earth that that's not who he is. Jesus is about the truth, and there are many who can't or don't want to handle the truth.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Next week, we will see even more division between those who believe and those who don't, and what that means for them and us. But now's your time to join the story for this week by sharing thoughts on in what part of Jesus' ministry do you personally see him as no ordinary man, and how can you try to adopt some of his ways as part of that ministry into your own life? How are the different reactions from people to Jesus then similar or different to how people react today? And do you only believe what you can see God do? Or do you see God do more because you believe in him? So this week, let's praise Jesus for the extraordinary things he does in our lives and pray that we are people who don't believe because we see, but see because we believe. And I'll catch you on the next part of our journey.